What's going on, everybody? It is overreaction time once again. I am your host, Simon Samano, and next to me on your screen, you see him every Monday hosting Spinning Back Click. You hear him twice a week hosting MMA Junkie Radio. It is none other than the OG of the fight game, Gorgeous George. What's good, my man? How are you?
Doing great, Simon. I am happy to be on ORT with you. Thanks for having me back.
I'm happy to have you back, man. And obviously, we're coming off a pay-per-view weekend, plus a lot of news and notes, so we got a lot to talk about. You ready for this bad boy?
Let's sort it out.
All right, Kamikaze, you know what time it is. Hit it.
I mean, guys, what are you fucking? Is this tonight's stupid question night? Are you guys that fucking stupid? You can't be that fucking stupid. Who gives a shit? One of the dumbest things I've ever read in my life. Fucking common sense. Everybody knows that.
All right, George, here we go. We're going to jump right into it right now, talking about UFC 313, straight to the top of the card, where we had Alex Pereira fighting Magomed Ankalaev in the main event at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. Man, that fight went a certain way. A lot of people talking afterwards like it was a funeral of sorts for Alex Pereira, who came down from earth and lost his light heavyweight title to Ankalaev by unanimous decision, 2 48-47s and a 49-46. Man, a pretty lackluster fight. Very unlike Chama for us to see that fight. So I'm going to go ahead and hit you with this, George. Alex Pereira has only himself to blame for losing to Magomed Ankalaev.
Only himself to blame.
He has only himself to blame.
Yeah, that's not an overreaction. So the only thing I needed to sort out in my head was the contribution or lack of from Magomed Ankalaev, but he came out and did what he, I guess, has been doing. So we started off more fearing his wrestling game. Then he developed the kickboxing. In fact, in his contender fight, he promised not to wrestle, one bit, and he didn't, and he won. And so in this fight, we had just enough of a little bit of what it takes to beat Alex Pereira. You have to threaten him a little bit with the wrestling. He threw the wrestling. It didn't work as much, but up against the fence, some Greco-Roman, some dirty boxing, some stalling, whatever you want to call it.
Never took it down.
So yeah, Alex Pereira has himself to blame because he thwarted those attacks. All right. He kept it standing where he wanted it, and he just didn't let him fly.
That's the thing, man. He didn't let it fly. And I'll even take it a step. I'll even go back a little bit, George, and why I say he only has himself to blame. What was the chatter going into this fight from like Daniel Cormier and some of these pundits? They were worried about him not being focused. Why? Because we knew just a few weeks earlier he was in Australia cornering Sean Strickland, right? And everybody was talking about how he should be focused on his training, not be distracted by anything else. In that regard, he really only has himself to blame. But then when you look at the fight itself, man, he was hesitant and he never let his hands go. And if Ankalaev, like what I'm saying here, I know kind of feels like I'm not giving Ankalaev enough credit. And honestly, I'm really not giving Ankalaev enough credit. And let me tell you why. Because if Ankalaev had beat him the way that we expected to, if his wrestling had actually dominated him, or even if he had taken him down one time, man, I'd be clapping my hands and giving all credit to Ankalaev because he executed a game plan. But the thing was, he stood in front of Alex Pereira, and for whatever reason, whether it was the mere fear of the takedown, he was just hesitant. He never let his hands go, and that's why I'm saying he has only himself to blame. What do you think?
No, I agree completely, 100%. In fact, he went to a Drake concert. He did a seminar, and he's cornering Strickland, and it's on the other side of the planet. It just takes a long time to recover. I don't care if you're a world-class athlete or not. And that's why a guy like Daniel Cormier, I was glad that he chimed in because he's obviously been to the top and he knows what that rest is like and the recovery is like. You just can't be doing that close to the fight. And I hesitated when you first asked because I wanted to think, did the UFC play a part? No, this is kind of one of the longest spells he's had of rest, right? And at the end of the day, they say, are you ready? And if you're not, okay, I'm sure they'll back off, at least with him, because he's been such a team player. But he had not just those 3 fights in less than 6 months. He had 5 fights in 16 months. That is a lot. And he's been, like I say, everywhere. Award shows, he's at the events themselves. He does stay busy, and he's going from this country to that country, from this continent to that continent. So the UFC played no part in this. And then I had to also think about your question. This is Pereira's
No,
fault.
not my question. My overreaction.
Your overreaction. This was your Pereira is at fault here, right? But the only thing I was thinking of, perhaps Ankalaev is at fault for not making it exciting, but that wasn't your overreaction. Your overreaction was based on Pereira
I
and
mean,
losing the title.
Yeah, if I'm Ankalaev, if Pereira's just going to let me stand in front of him and really not let his hands go, I would just stand in front of him too and kind of just work from the outside or keep him on his back foot, right? Because that's basically all that fight was for the most part, was just Pereira on his back foot.
12 significant strikes to the head in 25 minutes, Simon. That's crazy.
That's crazy, man. That is absolutely crazy. Okay, so I want to now transition to another thing where we're talking about Alex Pereira here, all right? Because as much as I just put all the blame on him for losing this fight this past weekend at UFC 313, I want to go ahead and hit you with this one now, George, all right?
Yep.
Alex Pereira will bounce back from UFC 313 and win one more UFC championship. I believe in Chama, baby. I still believe. I see a lot of people falling off the bandwagon, man, but I'm still on it. He's got one more title in him. Come on. Come on.
It's not an overreaction. It's not, because look how well he's done against. And by the way, I hope you're talking about light heavyweight. He better not go to heavyweight, because that dream's over.
I'm just saying he's gonna win. I'm just saying he's gonna win a championship, dude. A championship.
At light heavyweight, he
will.
Can
be as specific as you want, George.
Yeah, at light heavyweight, he will. I don't see him dropping back down to middleweight, and I think at heavyweight, as that fight was unfolding, I was telling Goes on the watch along, I go, Jon Jones would maul this guy. In fact, well, I'm not supposed to do this, but Drinkus Duplessis, Israel Adesanya, and the Yuri that just won, I thought they could have beaten Alex Pereira that night. And that two of those guys are middleweights, and one's been
the hesitant Pereira
he looked horrible. But that said, he has iced like so many of these cats already. And if he can clear that mental hurdle, right, and let his hands go, I think he's shown us that takedown defense is there. Yes, he can be a champion.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I think he's going to learn from this, right? I think he's going to learn from the prep, what we just touched on, right? Not doing so much before your fights, especially when this was the 5th of 5 fights in 16 months. He's been through so many training camps, stepped in on short notice. So there is probably a little bit of fatigue at play there, right? I'm not going to make any excuses for Pereira, because he's been a freaking hell of a warrior and a hell of a champion. So it's not about that. But I think he will learn from this experience, learn from his mistakes. And whether it is a Magomed Ankalaev rematch, which I seems we're going that way. Dana White did say probably that will happen. His word was probably. I think he's got a great chance to win the rematch against Ankalaev. I really do. You don't want to talk about heavyweight, but I'm telling you now, it's still going to be open, though, especially with him being a company guy. Look, he's not going to get the Jon Jones fight, but, Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall can handle their business. And then maybe Pereira can step in and try his hand against one of those guys. I still think he's going to be a champion at one division or the other, George. I know you think I'm crazy about heavyweight, though.
Yeah, that's an overreaction on the heavyweight side, but not on the light heavyweight side. You left yourself open, and I'm good with the light heavyweight, but the heavyweight, man, I only see him beating someone like Jairzinho, and who's already been cut. I already know that. Someone who's hesitant and is looking at the counter and slows it down and doesn't threaten the wrestling. But all them other guys like Pavlovich, Volkov, they're coming after his head. They're taking it off.
You could fight Cyril Gane too.
Yeah, Ghost brought that up too, but when he gets going, man, he's a pretty hard puncher himself. He's a big dude, so I would hold off on the Gane one.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens with Pereira moving forward. It's going to be interesting. He has bounced back from losing a championship once before to go up a division.
I know.
Title.
That was impressive.
He could bounce back from losing a championship one more time and move up. That's all I'm saying, George. I'm not going to count him out. Dude's a warrior, and I'm all in on Alex Pereira. Okay, dude. Let's move on to the next topic, which is going to be somewhat related to Alex Pereira in that heading into UFC 313, Alex Pereira versus Jon Jones was very much talked about, all right? It was very much talked about. There was a lot of hints that if he had won, If he had won, we were really trending in that direction. And Tom Aspinall was going to get screwed over. I said that last week on this show. But now, George, that the dust has settled on 313 and Alex Pereira has lost, I'm here to tell you now, man, no more bullshit. Jon Jones must fight Tom Aspinall or his legacy will take a hit.
That's an overreaction.
Ooh.
Yes, because that dude has done it all. He's won that second title and he had the title defense and he did it over such a long time. And I will say this, it would look like he was running from him for sure. But yes, ducking, running, all that stuff for sure. I would agree with that, except it wouldn't ruin the legacy because once they retire and move on and we all kind of collect our breath, we stand in awe when we look at the resumes and we're reminded by every weekend, all the action that takes place, just how great the immortals are because some of the other ones that are chasing them, they fall short. Case in point, Tyron Woodley. I'm going to be better than GSP. Kamar Usman was saying the same thing. Even Bilal Muhammad. I mean, we're like, slow down, guys. You're not even there yet. And you're already saying it. And then, of course, when they crash and burn, it blows up in their face because of social media and things like that. But, yeah, no, look, the best example I can give is I saw Roberto Duran at the Mandalay Bay one time. And my breath was taken away and I couldn't even get the words to tell my buddy, can you introduce me? Because he was buddies with Stitch Duran. With Roberto Duran, and I was like a little kid, and it reminded me of cheering for him 20, 30 years before that. That's what I think of legacy, man. It's just they've done something so great that you don't care about how it ended or what might have happened or whatever. A couple L's here, a couple L's there. It's that greatness that was once there, and that's why that legacy stands.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you say he's done everything. He's done everything to this point. There is still one more thing, man. One more thing, and it's Tom Aspinall, dude. I mean, Tom Aspinall, I know this really sounds like what's the word I'm looking for here? Recency bias, right? Recency bias, okay? It's gonna come off like recency bias, but I think though, if we look back at the list of contenders, always the next man up in the long history of Jon Jones title fights, Tom Aspinall has to be the most dangerous. He's got to be. Yeah. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're dangerous. Right about that. Francis Ngannou is the only other person I could have thought of.
Yeah, but we never. But I'm saying like it wasn't Thiago Santos. It wasn't Dominic Reyes.
Right.
Gustafsson. Yes, of course. We knew about the length and the range that was going to be a hell of a fight, and that one went really close. We didn't really think that way with Dominic Reyes, but it kind of played out that way too, where it was close and debatable if he had even won that fight. Not Rampage, not Rashad Evans, right? Like none of those guys I ever really thought, Anthony Smith, none of those guys I ever really thought was going to beat Jon Jones. And never even really thought DC was going to beat Jon Jones.
What about Gane? Did you think Gane was going to beat him?
I thought Gane had a chance. Yeah, I did, but not the way I think Aspinall has a chance. Not the way I think Aspinall does. And so I think really to close out his legacy strong, because listen, dude, you talk about how he's done it all, but you have to understand he's also done it all under a cloud of question marks surrounding his drug testing history, right? So if you really want to put a stamp, beat this one last guy. You want to put a stamp on being the GOAT? Beat Tom Aspinall. Show that you are truly the undisputed heavyweight champion, because right now he is a very disputed heavyweight champion.
That's true. I won't disagree with any of that. And yes, I would like to see it more than anything. But like I say, I always look back on history, and man, you don't know how bad I wanted GSP to fight Anderson Silva or Randy to fight Fedor or whatever. And it didn't happen. But then when the dust settled, I realized we still saw someone great. And I felt like it didn't take away from their legacy. But yeah, Jon's done it. Jon's ending does look like someone who's running and ducking, because I thought he did it with Ngannou, and now it looks like he's doing it with Aspinall. So on that part, he's going to take a hit for sure.
I'm saying, yeah, it can't be the lasting impression. That's what I'm saying, man. But let's not make this the lasting impression. We got to see him in the cage against this guy. And why you got to why are you bringing up old shit, man? Making me cry thinking about GSP and Anderson Silva, dude. Damn, I'm still not over the fact that that never happened.
That one hurt because they both cleaned out their divisions, and I would have liked to see them meet like at 180. Or even 175. I once saw Anderson Silva weigh in at 175 at a tournament in Hawaii, like in 2005. So I know he could make it. granted, he was a little older, but it looked like they could have worked something out. 177 and a
I
half
know.
or whatever, it would have been perfect.
If only GSP, if only Dana and the UFC were so open to to champ versus champ fights the way they are now. But it was a different time and era. So
Yeah, I hear
all right,
you.
man. Let's talk about now the UFC 313 co-main event. All right, where we saw Justin Gaethje defeat Rafael. Dude, I did it for a second week in a row. Can you believe that? I called him Rafael Fiziev last week. He's not Brazilian. Rafael Fiziev in a barn burner, another barn burner between these two guys. They fought a couple years back. Justin Gaethje beat him with them by majority decision then.
Mhm.
This was a unanimous decision, although it was pretty close fight the entire time. Fight of the night again. Hell of a back and forth fight, but ultimately Gaethje gets the close victory again. Now Justin Gaethje believes he is entitled or deserves a title shot. And Dana White, after UFC 313, kind of said he's in a good spot to maybe get it. But man, dude, let me just tell you, George, Justin Gaethje getting the next title shot would be absurd.
I would agree. That's not an overreaction because there's just.
And I respect
long
Justin
list.
Gaethje. I want to put that out there. I respect him, but I just think it would be absurd. Go ahead. Sorry. I wanted to
Yeah,
make that
no,
clear.
it's not an overreaction because first we have Arman Tsarukyan, who's a clear number one contender. And I know he fought Makhachev before, but not for a title. And then that whole thing fell apart and it looked ugly in LA. And I don't think the UFC liked it. But still, he's out there. He's lingering. And then Charles Oliveira, who took out Michael Chandler, seemed like he got anointed next because at that point, Ilia Topuria hadn't relinquished the 145 belt yet. So we thought, okay, well, it's going to be him while Tsarukyan pays his dues. But then Ilia Topuria, he relinquishes 145. How are you not going to think this guy's not next? It's big business. It's a good fight. I wouldn't say it's well earned because I still think he had business with Lopez and Movsar Evloev and maybe even a rematch of Volk. But fine, he wanted to move up, said he couldn't make the weight. So for Gaethje to cut the line on those three, it would be absurd.
Yeah, all respect to Justin Gaethje, but and it would be his third title shot. I mean, the biggest argument that he has going for him, the biggest thing working in his favor is that he is a fresh matchup, right? He hasn't fought.
Yeah.
He hasn't fought Islam Makhachev, but in a sense, the fact that one of his previous title fights was against Khabib kind of feels like we already saw that fight, right? I mean, it kind of feels like we already saw him fight Islam Makhachev. So, this would be his third undisputed title shot at an undisputed title. I know it's a fresh matchup, but man, he just based on deserving, Tsarukyan, Oliveira, they deserve it more. And you hit the nail on the head with Topuria. Maybe you would argue he doesn't deserve it over Gaethje because he's new to the division. But dude, he's hot, coming off the year that he came off of. And it's big business. It's much better business. So I just can't see him. I just think it would be absurd. I hope they play this right. I hope the UFC plays this right.
Me too. Now, where I will go to bat for Justin Gaethje is, if you'll recall, he knocked out Dustin Poirier, became a number one contender. But when Makhachev wasn't ready to go and the UFC was shuffling the deck for UFC 300, they came up with Holloway and Gaethje, and that cost Gaethje a shot.
Yep.
And in the meantime, Poirier, who remember had gotten knocked out, he snuck one in, beat BSD, Benoit Saint Denis, and he got to fight Makhachev. So I could see Gaethje maybe fighting one and getting in there because I think the UFC loves them some Justin Gaethje.
They do.
I don't know anyone that doesn't love them some Justin Gaethje, so I could see that. But straight into it, no, that'd be absurd.
Yeah, he would have to wait. He'd have to wait. It's got to be one of those fights we just mentioned, but he's got to wait. So
I agree.
All right, George. All right, let's move away from UFC 313 now. All right, and let's talk about some big news from this past week in the world of mixed martial arts and in the world of boxing, where it was announced that TKO in Big Turkey, how do you say his name?
Shake Turkey?
Shake Turkey. Yeah, Shake Turkey has now turned to the UFC and TKO and Dana White specifically to start a boxing promotion. Of course, this has been talked about for a long time. Dana White's always teased that he was going to come into boxing, and it's finally happening. It's official. They have a lot of work ahead of them. A lot of talk about building the business and starting from the ground up. A lot of those things being thrown around by Dana White. really saying they're going to change boxing and all that stuff, man. I don't know, man. I'm not as enthusiastic about this, which should be pretty clear when I tell you this, George. Dana White diving into boxing sucks for boxing.
Okay, you're like giving me a lot that I have to process really quick.
Process it, man.
Dana White going into boxing is bad for boxing. See, boxing's already in a state that I don't like to begin with.
Really?
But can he take it worse, is what you're saying?
Is he going to make it better?
That's
How
not an
could you say-
overreaction. It's not an
Okay.
overreaction.
Go ahead. Give it to me.
He look, man, he's got his hands full with UFC alone, and then he's got Power Slap. Of course, he's all obsessed over that. But the reason I think he's backed off from, remember, he used to wear the Zuffa boxing.
Mhm. He
One
wore
of
it
his
all
best
throughout
friends
the
is Skipper
McGregor.
Phelps from UNLV, and so he knows all the right people. But I just think that it goes against, I guess, the way he likes to handle his business, having all the control. So yeah, I think he's going to give it a good shot, but I don't think he's going to make boxing better. Now, is it going to obviously collapse? No, the sport of boxing will survive it. But yeah, I could see that. I could see where things wouldn't work out well. He's also got man an ego, and in boxing there's a lot of ego. There's a lot of old school pieces in place, and you have to work with those pieces. And if you can't, it's not going to work. So I could definitely see what you're saying. It's not an overreaction.
Yeah, I'm just like, all this talk about boxing being broken and boxing needing to be saved. How is it broken? How does it need to be saved? A lot of emphasis on, the best fight the best. And we're finally going to see the best fight the best because of this new promotion that, Dana White and Shake Turkey are going to create. Really? The best fight, the best don't fight the best in boxing over the course of the last few years? How many of these great fights have we seen? We've seen Fury versus Wilder, Fury versus Usyk, Joshua versus Usyk, Tank versus Garcia, Crawford versus Spence, Beterbiev versus Bivol. I mean, we've seen all these top fights just in the last few years alone, with guys like Eddie Hearn putting them on. I mean, the idea that boxing needs to be saved, what exactly does that mean? It's thriving right now.
Yeah, I have no problem with it. Now, there have been some delays, like, if we want to go back a little bit more, your Pacquiao and Mayweather, that one definitely took a long time. We got it. We got it past their prime, but we got it.
Now we're going back like a decade, though.
Correct. Yeah. So, I was telling the guys this earlier, but I feel like Shake Turkey is
Big Turkey works for me, dude. Big Turkey.
All right. He's a rich kid in college, and he's hiring a tutor to do the work. He's got the money.
Great analogy.
Right? So that's what he's doing. He's just trying to get someone who has the experience, who doesn't mind being the bad guy and doing some of that dirty work. And then once the ship is sailing, then Shake Turkey will take it. But I think this is just a couple-year experiment just to see if he can sort things out, let Dana be the bad guy or whatever. But I don't see him leaving it in a better place. I think it's just, I don't think we're really going to notice much.
Well, let me ask you this. What do you think, George, about the idea of bringing the UFC model of a league and applying it to boxing, which, number one, is seemingly would have a major hurdle in front of it in the form of the Ali Act, because you can't really have a boxing league. We have all these sanctioning bodies, all the three-letter sanctioning bodies, right? WBO, the IBL, all the sanctioning bodies already. Creating a league like the UFC and doing it in boxing. And the reason why I bring that up is because that was sort of emphasized in the press release, and you heard it in a lot of Dana's interviews. We want to identify young talent and, really build something from the ground up like it's the UFC and really replicate the model. Can you really just replicate the model in boxing? Can it work?
I'm not so sure that you can. The Ali Act, prevents the promoter and the agent from being basically the same person.
Yep.
And so this would have to be like a 25-year project to maybe, wash all of the old school methods of putting a fight together, where 80% of the money does go to the fighters and 20% goes to the promotion, whatever they have to do. The UFC model is a little bit different. So that would be a challenge in itself. Your business might tank before you get to some of these, young kids that can become stars, where your business has an opportunity to thrive. So getting a lot of these fighters to commit to big fights is going to take big paydays. And I think that's what Shake Turkey eventually wants to do is, hey, look, I have the money and I don't mind losing a little bit if there's a process here where eventually we start to turn a profit and it starts to work out. And I think that's where Dana White's going to try and come in a little bit, but I don't know that it's going to work in boxing because there's too many other shows also still outside of these guys where the fighters can turn to, and I'm not even so sure that what's happening in the Middle East might not just be like a 5-year, 10-year run we're in the midst of, and that's it. And that goes for golf, soccer, and boxing.
And don't you think, George, even if let's just say this TKO boxing promotion does establish itself as a premier player in the space of boxing over the next however long, 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case is. I don't know how long Dana's going to try and push this, right? It establishes itself. That doesn't necessarily mean that the 3-letter sanctioning bodies are all going to go away, right? They're still going to be there. They're still going to do their thing. The Eddie Hearns and the Oscar De La Hoyas and of the world are not going to go away. They're still going to be promoting boxing. Don't we just end up then in the similar scenario that we have in the UFC and MMA, where we would often have a conversation because Dana says he doesn't want to work. He said in an interview with Dan Rafael from ESPN. Well, he used to work for ESPN, but longtime boxing journalist Dan Rafael. He said in an interview with him on his podcast, he has no interest in working with those sanctioning bodies. It's going to be all him, as you mentioned. He's controlling. Well, then don't we just end up in the same scenario where he doesn't promote? Like now in the UFC, he doesn't promote with the PFL to get a best versus best. He never promoted with Bellator, where we could have seen some of these big fights where we wanted to see like a Johnny Eblen versus Israel Adesanya or something like that at one point, right? Like, doesn't that then just create a problem still that exists currently in MMA?
Correct. Now he's not going to have the best fight the best because those fighters will have other options, and it's not going to be easy to corral all of those professional boxers when you got all these other successful promotions and promoters doing their thing, and they've been doing their thing pretty well. Some of them even working with each other in the last 2 years. Boxing's not really missing that much of a beat as they're trying to make it sound. Sure, what they're doing out there, in Riyadh is pretty special. But at the same time, it's not like a deal breaker for boxing. If it wasn't happening there, the absurd amount of money that gets thrown around there, it would be happening in New York, in Las Vegas, in Miami, and other places. But, like I say, I think some of these fighters are realizing, man, that there's a lot of money out there. And I just want to be a part of this wave that they're in right now.
Yeah. Okay, man. All right, let's transition to something still related to Dana. All right. I was thinking about this one long and hard, man, on the heels of Dana White diving into boxing. And you touched on something earlier in this last segment that kind of plays off of what my thoughts were. I'm going to hit you with this one, George. It might be coming out of left field for you, but you tell me what you think, man. The UFC product will keep suffering with Dana White in charge.
Will keep suffering with Dana White in charge.
Are you happy with the current state of the UFC and the fights and the events that we're
getting? If I may, can you just break down the suffering part? Because financially, they seem to be doing well there.
So that's why I'm putting the emphasis on the product, right? I know the UFC is making big money and loads of money off of all their revenue streams. I completely understand that. But there's a difference between business and what you're actually putting out there. And right now, what we're getting is a watered down version of the UFC. And we've been getting a watered down version of the UFC for a few years now, if you ask me. Maybe some people would even say since the sale several years back. When you combine that with the fact that Dana White is diverting so much of his attention to Power Slap, now he's going to divert so much of his attention to boxing. How does this make the UFC better? That's my question, with Dana White still calling the shots and being in charge.
Okay. So if you don't mind, will you say the statement one more time? The UFC's
product will keep suffering with Dana White in charge.
That's not an overreaction. That's not an overreaction. I think Dana is brilliant when you look at the course of 25 years and what he's done, for sure. But there have been big mistakes along the way. And he hasn't always been right. Women's MMA wanted nothing to do with it. The lightweight division, it went away for a long time, and arguably it's its most exciting division now. And then the fights that he could have possibly put together but didn't put together. So yeah, there's been for sure some mistakes along the way. And then you got a guy like such a resourceful guy like Hunter Campbell, who has what appears to be a business acumen. He's young and hungry, and then he's got the law degree. And so he's back there doing the patchwork, a lot of the heavy lifting when fights fall apart. And he seems to come up with some great ideas. Like when that card, I don't remember the cards exactly by the number, but when Hamzat was 10 pounds over and they reshuffled the card with Nate and Tony and like
Holland and everybody. Yeah.
Right. He's got something to that. Some of that hunger that I think Dana is lacking. So it's smart for Dana to have Hunter next to him, to his side, but now with Dana getting pulled in so many directions, yeah, I could definitely see the UFC, if they were to part ways with Dana White, probably taking another step forward in the right direction.
Yeah, and I mean the thing too is we're just in an era of the UFC where the oversaturation that we kind of complained about a few years back is like it's an oversaturation of oversaturation. Like we're getting so many events now that are one fight and whatever beneath it, two fights and whatever. Like how many pay-per-views in the last couple of years have you looked at the card and gone, it's a great main event and a co-main event, and then junk. And then Dana White has said, well, he was never going to run his shows like boxing, right? Like you would have to wait a long time just to get to a main event with all these undercard fights that nobody cared about. We're experiencing that on a regular basis now with the UFC. UFC 314 coming up next month is like the anomaly. It is like the exception to what we normally get, right? Like that is a really good card. And the UFC has like what, 600-700 fighters under contract, a lot of huge names. They have the roster to still give us at least pay-per-views on a regular basis that are delivering, but they're not even giving us that anymore. Never mind that we're not talking about, never mind the fight nights that we're getting like this weekend where we're getting a Vittorio Dolidze rematch that we all were clamoring for. Wink, 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 at the UFC Apex with whatever else. It's like that's a regular occurrence. I just wish we could make MMA great again, man. I wish Dana White could do it, but he's getting he's just his attention is just he's spread too thin.
Yeah, I thought the card in LA was nice, but the next two were sauce. The one in Sydney and then this one in Vegas, I did not like them at all. The one in Miami, I am getting fired up about.
Of course.
So yeah, and not only is he spread too thin, I think they're superstar talent because they may have 700 fighters, but only 100 of them does everyone actually care about, right? And the rest fill in until they become stars. They're spread too thin. And then, as you were talking, I was remembering how like a Chris Weidman, there was certain athletes where Dana White butted heads with them so bad. Lorenzo used to step in and
had to mediate those situations.
Right. Yeah. And so you hear more and more of those types of cases. I think what he's done is, like I say, is a phenomenal job. But I do see how what you said is correct. It's not an overreaction. And I could see the benefit of the UFC even without a Dana White altogether, much less a spread out Dana White.
Yeah, and I'll just say too. Look, listen, I know I often get labeled as a Dana White hater. I actually appreciate what Dana White has done for this sport for the last 20 plus years, man. I mean, he helped make MMA. He's brought it as far as he can bring it. I'm not sure how much better he can make it, and I don't think he can make it much better as long as he's focused on a power slap, focused on a boxing promotion coming up. Like UFC is his baby. He used to treat it like his baby. He's not really treating it like his baby. He's treating it now like it's a young adult, like it's a teenager. You know what I mean? And now he's got these other babies that he's going to be focused on. I just think, it's going to keep suffering if he's in charge. And I think he's brought the UFC as far as he can. Final word to you, George.
No, I agree completely. And I think he should just sail off into the sunset. The other two brothers sailed off into the sunset, pockets full of money. That's what would happen with Dana White. I'm sure Dana could even retain maybe some control. I think he's got too much of an ego and he loves the power too much to not even be able to control tickets, and who's going to sit where and who's showing up and all that good stuff. But the show can definitely survive without him. I think he even said that one time, but it was years ago, and he wouldn't give the name as to who he thought could be the president.
He still won't.
People
He
used to
still
think
won't. Yeah.
Chael. People used to think Daniel. I think it's pretty obvious now. It's probably Hunter Campbell. But you know, I will say this too on his behalf. You needed to be dirty, like he has been, to make this successful, because obviously we all deal with fighters in different capacities. They're not the easiest species to work with, so you have to push back. You have to get a little grease under your fingernails or whatever. It's just that along the way, it's been a lot. It's accumulated, and I think there's nothing wrong with having a fresh face at the top.
All right, well, that's how you close out the show, man, with the OG Gorgeous George getting the final word. The time for overreaction has come to an end. George, hope you enjoyed yourself on the show this week.
I did. I mean, I love this, and don't let too many ORTs go through without having me back, please.
Yeah, I know, man. I'm sure you want to be more frequent, right? You want to be on the show more frequently. So
exactly.
I will make it a point to get you on. But everybody for watching, I appreciate you guys. Please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It would mean a lot. And we will see you on the next edition of Overreaction Time. So long.
MMA Junkie AI.